Chapter 14. Mission 22, We'd be happy with any data at all, really, Part 6 of 6. The heat shield floated there in front of Cherry, half in the shadow of the remaining stub of her ship. She'd expected the scorching, the streaks of residue that wrapped around the edges and ran partway up the science service compartment. She hadn't expected the bubbling, the lumps, the chunks. The whole principle behind the heat shield laid in its substance boiling away under the intense heat and pressure of hypercompressed atmosphere. In the act of burning off, the ablator, one of 101 useful substances which could be puked up by an inventive changeling, carried away the heat energy which otherwise would have been transferred to the metal hull of the ship, melting through it and leading to disaster. The ablator was applied in layer after layer to prevent cracks from forming and going straight through to the heat shield's base, but those layers apparently didn't burn off quite as evenly as every pony had thought. But it was either push here, or push on the parachute housing, and of the two Cherry would much rather bump into this. There was a small chance that the capsule's internal cooling system could keep up if something happened to the shield. There had been close calls before, when heat alarms had warned of hull temperatures close to the melting point of the metal, and the ships had come through. But mess up the parachute deployment system even a little, and it wouldn't matter whether or not the ship survived the fireball. So, here she was, suddenly feeling very silly indeed. The ship, the capsule and add-ons, really weighed about 4 tons. Her thruster pack had been rated to deal with a total load of about 400 pounds, maximum. The idea that what she was about to do would have any meaningful effect, well, it felt like Celestia had offered to let her raise the sun one morning using nothing but a fishing pole. But maybe if you set the hook in the right place, a fishing pole can do amazing things, she told herself. She nudged her controls slightly. I'm in place, she said. How long until apoapsis? Less than a minute, Chrysalis replied. The bulls say to start the push in your own time. Copy, or eaten. Proceeding. Cherry took a deep breath, then nudged the controls forward. Her spacesuit hadn't been built for what she was about to do. She couldn't use her forehooves to push, because she needed them on the controls for the thrusters to work at all. Using her rear hooves would throw her out of balance and likely send her spinning off the ship. That meant all the force of the thrusters would have to be transmitted through the control arms under her forelegs. They'd been built to be sturdy, yes, but they'd been built to be lightweight most of all. No pony, not even Twilight Sparkle, had ever thought to test them pushed up against a wall at full burn. So she let the suit drift gently forward, the control arm tips touching the unevenly burned surface of the heat shield. They bumped and bounced her backwards, forcing her to give the thrusters another forward burst. Then they made contact again, and before she rebounded again she pushed the forward thrust stick as hard forward as it would go. And, as the suit rocked and bobbed against the rounded base of her ship, she kept her hoof pushed forwards, using her other hoof for tiny adjustments, using her own body weight within her spacesuit for more. She swung her rear hooves forward to stop the rocking on the arms. Rocking would dig them in, make holes in the heat shield that might not be survivable. And, of course, any thrust off the direct line forward was wasted effort, wasted energy, and above all, wasted time. Forward. 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 Come on, slow me down, darn it. Slow me the buck down. Her spacewalks before, and her suit flight above the frozen lake on Minmus, had been mostly smooth and easy to control. This was anything but. The suit didn't like what it was being made to do, and it tried to rock left and right, up and down, anything except staying still. If it hadn't been for the Probodidyne computer and the ship's SAS keeping the ship steady as a rock, Cherry didn't know whether she'd come down in Equestria or on Bucephalus. More thrust. Still thrusting. All the thrust. Is this working? I can't tell. The suit doesn't give me a periapsis readout, only a speed, and I don't remember what the speed was when I shut down. 22, shut down. Cherry's hoof lifted off the thruster control. She drifted back away from the ship, as the control arms automatically folded up back into the suit backpack. "Shut down," she called out. "What's my status, Eden?" "Roughly speaking," Chrysalis said, "you're at the Periapsis mission R4 used on its return. We show you at 41% energy remaining in suit thrusters, please confirm." 41%? Then I didn't need a full burn? She checked her readouts and replied, "Affirmative, Eden, 41%. "Okay then, 22, Chrysalis said. "Get back in the capsule, eat, and get some sleep. You have atmospheric interface in less than 8 hours, and we want you rested for the ride home." Asterisk. On the telepresence projection, Mission 22 soared outbound once more, containing one truly annoyed pink Earth pony, at least if the clipped responses and minimal speech coming from her meant anything. But whatever the pony was feeling, Chrysalis felt that much with a zero behind it. "Would somebody like to tell me," she asked the room in general once her headset was turned off, "why it is I shouldn't take that useless blinky light thing in the corner and throw it into the nearest volcano? It's only a few hundred miles away, by the way. No trouble for me at all, which is more than I can say for 4 scientists who can't figure out how to calculate air resistance properly." "We're doing the best we can, Your Majesty," von Braun rumbled, unruffled. "We're still learning about the upper atmosphere." "Kindly explain to me, then," Chrysalis interrupted, "why Twilight Sparkle can predict air resistance accurately enough to bring a spacecraft in for a runway landing at her own space center, while we're lucky to find the right ocean." My Queen occupant began, then flinched as Chrysalis turned her glare on him. "I am talking here," the Queen shouted. Actually you're shouting, My Queen," occupant said. Chrysalis took a deep breath. "Thank you, occupant, I stand corrected." Another deep breath. "As I was saying, I am shouting here." Occupant ducked behind the flight controller console, barely peeking over it. "Yes, ma'am," he squeaked, "but I just want to point out that Miss Cherry almost came down this time, and in another hour or so she really will be coming down, and we need to be ready." He allowed himself to rise a little higher and added, "And, well, technically, my Queen, you did put me in charge, so, I need my Capcom to get her mind back on the mission. Please. If you don't mind, my Queen." Chrysalis found herself caught between 2 incompatible desires. There was the desire to decapitate the insubordinate drone and suck its guts out, 431. But, at the same time, there was the sudden desire to sing and dance around the room to celebrate the moment that a changeling demonstrated initiative, composure, and competence all at the same time, a thing which didn't happen nearly often enough. 432. As much fun as either option seemed, though, she'd have to pass on both. She took a deep breath, copied the in-out motion with her hoof she'd seen the Purple Princess of Neuroses do once or twice, 433, and said, "Roger, flight." And well stated. She gave the bullpen another glance and added, "We will discuss this again later." That done, she nodded to Timble, the voice of Mission Control, who raised the shutters on the observers gallery again and reactivated the intercoms. The press was there, and so also, for the 3rd day straight, were Twilight Sparkle and all her little rainbow smitey friends, plus Starlight Glimmer and a couple of others Chrysalis wasn't on name terms with. "Who is that one with the eyebrows and the terrible glasses?" "Whatever. They didn't hear my tantrum." "Probably. Anyway, now to pretend we knew what we were doing all along." Again. Someone put a piece of paper in front of Timble, and the deep-voiced changeling read it once more. "On mission day 18, mission time 0130, 1942 hours Eden local time, mission 22 has completed its 3rd and final aerobraking maneuver. The capsule containing Changeling Space Program Chief Astromare Cherry Berry will reach an apoapsis of 510 km and re-enter Equus atmosphere less than an hour from now, with the current splashdown point estimated somewhere in the eastern celestial ocean. All ship systems are currently fully functional, and no difficulty is anticipated on final descent. This is the voice of Mission Control, or Eden. Sounds convincing, Chrysalis thought as she turned her headset back on and prepared to brief the pony on what was to come. I only hope it's true. Footnotes 431. Oh, she'd spit them out immediately. Her tiny stomach capacity aside, Chrysalis found changeling guts repulsive to the taste. 432. Chrysalis never considered that the rarity of the instance might be due in part to the non-zero frequency of changelings getting their heads cut off and their guts sucked out. That sort of thing tends to dampen initiative. 433. If she'd known where Twilight Sparkle got that routine from, Chrysalis would never have even considered adopting that particular method of calming herself. She would even have seriously considered amputating the limb forever soiled from imitating Princess Perfecter than thou. She wouldn't have actually done it, but she would have considered it for quite some time indeed. End footnotes. For the fourth and quite definitely final time, Mission 22 blazed across the night skies of Equus, headed for a landing somewhere, somehow. The only question was, in how many pieces? Cherry had had a whole hour to look at the computer's estimate of the remaining ablator layer on the heat shield, 28%. The previous pass through the atmosphere, which had bottomed out a good 5 kilometers higher than Mission R4's lowest pass stupid rocket geniuses, had taken out 40% of the total starting ablative layers. How much of that was due to the much deeper, hotter pass through the atmosphere, and how much damage was caused by the push, neither she or the boffins on the ground knew. They might never know. If the heat shield plays out while I'm still at hypersonic speeds, I certainly won't ever know. But, of course, there wasn't any alternative now. There was no question of a second get out and push maneuver, not this close to Equus. And anyway, Cherry now suspected that the whole thread the bulls had followed had been a mistake. The trick wasn't to come down slowly, it was to come down and slow down as quickly as possible, to limit the amount of time the heat shield was forced to do its work. And once she got back on the ground, she'd share that hard-won wisdom with the bulls. Besides, Cherry still liked her odds. The ship still had control, thanks to the reaction wheels. She had mostly full batteries, thanks to the still functional solar panels. And if the heat shield was thin, it was still working, and this time, she was coming in barely faster than an ordinary orbital flight would. This time, she thought, the bird is coming down safely. She watched the computer readouts as the ship rattled and shuddered around her, as the speed dropped, as the G-forces pushed her harder and harder into the flight couch. After 2 weeks of weightlessness and near weightlessness, the feeling of 3 times normal gravity came as a rude surprise, and as the ship began to really dig into the atmosphere, that pressure began to increase. The capsule shook like a washing machine. Plasma streaked by the tiny windows, as the computer estimate of ablator remaining ticked down, faster and faster. The vector readouts on the SAS system twitched back and forth, the most minute of adjustments, but far better than anything Cherry could have done by hoof. The ship stayed safe and secure within its shockwave cone, plunging into the middle atmosphere, turning speed into heat. And then, less heat. And less. The pressure began to let up on Cherry. Below her, out of her vision, Eden sped past, as watchers below caught the last flickers of plasma glowing around the ship before the vapor trail vanished among the clouds and stars of Luna's nighttime skies. But even now, Cherry didn't relax. The worst was over. The computer estimated that a sliver of heat shield remained, 434, unburned, despite all the abuse. She still had enough altitude and forward momentum to get her velocity down below the speed of sound. But the remaining 260 meters per second or so of speed had to be countered by parachute, and that parachute had been on ice for 2.5 weeks. It was probably fine. R4's parachute had been fine. But it wasn't guaranteed. Of course, if the parachute didn't slow her down, the planet would slow her down for good about 30 seconds later, so it wasn't like there was any point in worrying. The airspeed velocity readout ticked down rapidly into the triple digits, then slowed as it dropped below 500 meters per second. The parachute indicator light went amber at 400 meters per second, but Cherry wasn't in any hurry. Green would do. At 290 meters per second the light went green, and Cherry hit the staging switch for the final time in the mission. She felt the jolt of the explosive hatch release, the shudder in the ship as first the drogue and then the main chute deployed, pulling hard back on the capsule even without fully opening just yet. And then flame, as bright as the plasma from the re-entry fireball, flickered past the hatch window. Cherry found it a struggle to crane her head to look as, in the flickering light of its own nostrils, a large reptilian head peered back through the thick glass. Then it was gone again, and not a moment too soon, for about 2 seconds later, as the ship passed below 1 kilometer above sea level, the parachute's choke cords released, and the canopy billowed open, slowing the capsule down in one final 6G jerk of deceleration. And then, as the ship drifted down at a safe 6.5 meters per second, the head with its pilot light nostrils reappeared. Something thumped against the side of the ship. 2 solid, slow whump, whumps. 22, or Eden, Chrysalis's voice came back. We have word from Dragon Lord Ember that her rescue team has sighted you and is in close escort. Our own retrieval team is 30 minutes out and closing. Roger, or Eden, Cherry said, letting her spacesuit helmet fall back onto the flight couch. It was done. It was over. She could relax and let other ponies, or whatever, take it from here. The ocean slammed into the bottom of Cherry's capsule like a runaway wagon, but the capsule had been designed to withstand it. The little ship wobbled and rocked before settling into a float in the calm waters. Or Eden, this is Mission 22 reporting splashdown. Craft is stable 1, repeat stable 1. Cherry Berry paused for a moment's thought, then added, beginning spacecraft closeout at this time. Bearing souvenirs from Luna's stars, and proving that pony kind can travel safely to other worlds, this is Changeling Space Program Mission 22, signing off. And that was it. She'd proven that a pony could go to a moon. Now it was time to send a pony to the moon. Mission 22 report. Mission summary: land on Minmus, conduct temperature scans on and near Minmus, gather surface samples and other scientific data from Minmus, return safely to Equus. Pilot, Cherry Berry, backup, Probodibyne Mk2 probe core. Flight duration, 17 days, 2 hours, 55 minutes. Contracts fulfilled, 1. Milestones: first EVA on Minmus, first flag on Minmus. Conclusions from flight: there's a little unfinished business, but it could have been worse. We're ready now, time for the main event. Mission assessment: successful enough. Footnote 434. The computer turned out to be optimistic. When the capsule of Mission 22 was recovered, the recovery team found the metal plate of the heat shield exposed in most places, with only the tiniest traces of ablative material remaining. Cherry Berry never asked why. The day she was released from the infirmary, 16 changelings wearing those stupid fake aviator helmets lined up and gave her one of the snappiest salutes she'd ever seen. She figured it was because she'd just been to Minmus. But in truth the changelings showed their respect for a pony who'd come closer to a personal interview with the pale horse than even the most suicidally stupid drone in the hive and came out intact. Changelings admired that sort of unthinking courage. It was why they still followed Chrysalis. End footnote. Author's note. First, tomorrow night, September 5, 2019, at 8 p.m. I'm going to live stream some CSP on Twitch TV. Here's the URL for the channel: https://www.twitch.tv/redneckgaijin. Now to the story. Leopard appears courtesy of my top Patreon supporter. Thanks. Boy, how many ways did I almost kill Jebediah/Cherry on this mission? Eyeballing the launch, I missed the launch angle so bad that I would have wasted less fuel by just going straight east. The first landing really did appear to be on flatter land than it turned out to be. Minmus's surface is deceptive that way. I actually landed a little hard, 5.6 m/s, and bounced on the first attempt, destroying all 3 engines in the process. Luckily I'd quick saved before beginning the landing run. The slow flop over of the second landing I kept. I seriously considered leaving her there for rescue, but I got lucky the landing struts hadn't actually broken, and the reaction wheels had enough power just to right the ship without having to risk a launch scraping along the surface. The second landing, on the lake where any sensible person would land, was a doddle by comparison. And then there was the return. I absolutely fucked up, no lesser word describes the error, my departure from Minmus, to the point that I actually had a Kerbin/Equus escape trajectory when I left. My attempts to get a return to Kerbin generated not fewer than 6 correction burns, because each burn resulted in another Minmus encounter that kicked me back out and undid a lot of the previous burn's effect. By the time I finally got a definite in-atmosphere periapsis, I was down to about 10% fuel in the final stage. And then I second-guessed myself and raised that periapsis, when I should have known better, because of the speed. After the second pass I quick-saved again and decided to ride it out, but 8 passes later, with the heat shield pretty much cooked, I reverted to the quick-save and debated whether or not to Scott Manley the ship into a stable orbit and send a rescue mission, or push the ship into a lower periapsis and get the ship down. The main reason I was considering the first option, by the way, was that I'd only packed 1 parachute on the trip, and I was not at all sure it could survive a touchdown on land. If something had gone wrong in that way, I would have gone to the quick save again and done just that. But, as it happens, all ended well no thanks to my distracted driving, and Mission 22 goes into the books as an almost complete success. One final note, 3 chapters remain. End author's note. End chapter 14, Mission 22, we'd be happy with any data at all, really.